مرحبا، أهلا وسهلا فيكم في مؤسسة عبد المحسن القطان. اسمي يزيد عناني، مدير البرنامج العام، وبرحب فيكم بالجلسة الثانية من جلسات مشروع إننا بنشتغل عليه فترة طويلة اسمه الجدال القيمي، 3 عقود من الممارسة القيمية الفلسطينية. الحقيقة قبل ما أبدأ أشرح هذا العنوان اللي معقد شوية كتير، بدي أول إشي أحكي إنه هذا المشروع هو أجا ثمرة حوار طويل مع المتحف الفلسطيني، وبحب أشكر عادل العايدي لأنها حطت جهد وطاقة كبيرة في هذا المشروع وساعدت بدعمه وساعدت ب يعني شكله اللي احنا شايفينه رح نشوفه هلا. وبحب أشكر طبعا الطاقم التقني اللي بدونه ما بنقدر نعمل هيك جلسات، وطبعا المتحدثين كلياتهم بكل الجلسات. وآخر إشي بشكر أسماء مزين لأنها تعبت في ترتيب التغيرات اللي عملها بتصير مستمرة بهذا المشروع. الحقيقة المشروع بلش بكوننا الممارسة القيمية هي ممارسة مش كتير واضحة في فلسطين للجمهور بشكل عام. دائما في عدم وضوح شو يعني قيم، شو يعني ممارسة قيمية، إيش خص القيم في المعارض، علاقة القيم في المؤسسة، شو بيعمل كل يوم القيم بالشغل تبعه. هذه دائما الأسئلة إلها أكثر من سنين عمالها تظهر في أوساط النقاش بين الفنانين وبين العاملين بالوسط الثقافي. فحبينا مع المتحف الفلسطيني نأطر العمل القيمي في فلسطين ونحاول نعطيه ملامحه اللي بتخص خصوصية فلسطين تحت الظرف الاستعماري الإسرائيلي اللي احنا عايشين فيه بأشكاله المختلفة بكل محل. فعشان هيك هذه الجلسات أنا برأيي كتير مهمة. رح تخلص بتوثيقها، وضعها في صيغة منشورة. هاي المنشورة تكون زي مرجعية لتأطير العمل القيمي في 3 عقود الأخيرة. وليه 3 العقود الأخيرة؟ لأنه تركز العمل القيمي. أكيد كان في عمل يعني كيوريشن لمعارض قبل عقول يعني عدة فنانين، بس تركزت بالآخر 30 سنة. السبب هو دخولنا بمعاهدات السلام وأوسلو، بالتالي انفتاحنا على المشهد العالمي من مؤسسات، من متاحف، من قيمين، من فنانين عالميين اللي توافدوا على فلسطين بشكل كبير. وكمان في فنانين فلسطينيين رجعوا على فلسطين بالمعرفة تبعتهم وشاركوا في صناعة المؤسسات، خاصة مؤسسات المجتمع المدني. وبالتالي صار في أكثر كلمة قيم ظهرت، وصار في حواليها نقاش كتير، خاصة بالوسط الفني بشكل خاص. فاليوم راح أول إشي أدعوكم تحضروا الحلقات الثانية أو الجلسات الثانية اللي فيها راح نحكي عن القيم والمتحف. شو بيعني قيم ومتحف؟ شو يعني العلاقة بين القيم والفنان اللي هي دائما علاقة فيها توتر أو ممكن ما فيها توتر، بس دائما في حكي عن دور وين بيخلص وبيبدأ دور القيم، وين بيخلص وبيبدأ دور الفنان، وإيش الخطوط الحمراء المحطوطة بين القيم والفنان. رح نحكي عن المهرجانات الضخمة زي البيناليات في فلسطين وخارج فلسطين. ورح نحكي كمان عن التمثيل. شو بيعني تمثيل فلسطين كهوية، كصراع داخل هاي البيناليات، وكيف بيتم تمثيلها بصريا ونصيا وبأشكال أخرى كمان. وآخر إشي مهم نفهم كمان سياسات القيمية، خاصة بتغيرات الإقليمية اللي بتصير، والوجود الأموال اللي بتخص المشروع الثقافي وتغيراتها، خاصة هلأ الخليج وإيش عماله بصير فيه. كانت أوروبا في فترة معينة ولحد هلأ بس بيخف عماله المشروع التمويلي الثقافي. فمهم كمان هذا المشروع يعني يحكي بهذه المداخلات. وآخر إشي إيش بيعني القيم الشاب، والقيم الشاب ودوره بالنظر لهذا التاريخ، وكيف بتطلع على العمل القيمي والعمل مع الفنان، شو بيعني فن وشو بيعني قيمية للقيم الشاب. فهذه المواضيع كلها راح تتقسم من هون للسنة الجاي على حلقات حوارية زي اللي احنا قاعدين فيها هون. بحب احكي قبل ما ننتقل لأسماء انه في تقنيا في زي إشارة لكرة أرضية تحت في الزوم للمشاهدين أو المستمعين على زوم، بيقدروا يضغطوها فبيطلع لهم إنجليزي ولا عربي، يختاروا اللغة اللي هم بدهم يسمعوها لآخر الجلسة. For our audience, English-speaking audience, I would ask them to find the icon where you have the globe, the Earth, with its meridians. You click it, and then you can really start select an interpretation language, and you continue with the same language of interpretation the rest of the session. So now I'll give the mic to Asma to introduce the speakers, and thank you.
اوكي، اهلا وسهلا فيكم بجمهورنا الموجود في القاعه وكمان على اللايف وعلى الزوم. راح اعرف بالمتحدثين اليوم. معنا فيرا تماري. فيرا فنانه فلسطينيه تشكيليه ومؤرخه للفن الاسلامي ومدرسه للفن وقيمه فنيه. عندنا كمان معنا من المحاضرين ترداد ذو القدر، قيم وكاتب ويعمل مدرسا في برنامج الدراسات العليا في جامعه الفنون في برلين. ومعنا كمان تشارلز آش، هو مدير لمتحف فان آبي في هولندا وأستاذ للفنون المعاصرة في جامعة الفنون في لندن. وكمان معنا الميسرة رح تكون عليا ريان، ناقدة فنية وكاتبة ومحاضرة قيمة فنية، عملت في برلين وبيروت ونيويورك وعمان ورام الله لدى منظمات ثقافية دولية ومجالات فنية. وأهلا وسهلا فيكم.
عليا.
مرحبا كمان مني. هلا اذن انا ببلش. انا هلا بس ترجع لانجليزي. So I will switch towards English to lead us a little bit to this exciting meeting we have. I would like to stress before we start a little bit why we have chosen this specific perspective for this panel. So usually when we come together as curators, we talk about our work as we talk about the results of our work. We talk about the exhibitions, we talk about the objects, about our relationships towards the artists, how the audience receive our work. So rarely actually we have the time to talk about the implementation, the process, the going towards the exhibition, the research time, and then also the implementation on the ground. So, and I believe very much that especially here is a lot of knowledge which we should extract or we should use and talk about, because here is the possibility to learn how we actually translate whatever we have in mind towards the conditions on the ground, and how much the conditions on the ground and the experiences shift again backwards our practice. This can be as well a way of decolonize our practice, and it can be also a way of or decolonize our practice. So I'm very excited that we have the possibility here to come together, and have the possibility to be here with friends and colleagues to have a closer look to our practice from perspective of implementation, and what kind of experience we could collect, and what were the unexpected or expected experiences we witnessed on our way towards having the result of the exhibition. So I have a bit of a double situation or double position here. I'm of course the person who's happy to lead us through this conversation, and I will squeeze in and ask questions, but nevertheless here and there I think I will also come up with my own experiences during my time as director of الحقل between 2013 and 16. So it will of course come here and there in, but nevertheless I would like first to give the floor to my colleagues, and we will go into the first round by combining the two questions I shared with everyone. I'm not sure if the audience saw them already, but I would like to start with the questions of what lessons can be learned by looking back to the implementation process of our work and what were the challenges. And I would like to ask my colleagues to start by picking one or two experiences only, because if we talk about all our experiences, it would be too much. So try to squeeze a little bit your knowledge into one or two examples, please, and share with us your assumptions before you went into the implementation process. Assumptions in a sense of how do you contextualize yourself, of course, with the situation, and what you thought you will experience and be confronted with. And then as well about the challenges and deviations from your assumptions you witnessed, actually. So because here I hope we can find a little bit an interesting conversation of what it means to translate certain contexts and concepts from other parts of the world to our very specific position in Palestine, and how much we can gain out of the knowledge we collect while doing and implementing these concepts or these exhibitions, as Yazid also explained in his introduction. I would like to give the floor up. And just one more thing. We don't have so much time, and I know we're all talkative, so let's please try to squeeze us down to 6-7 minutes per participant for now, per speaker, and so to be able to come back also to a conversation and to come into discussion, because that's really what I hope will happen at the end, and also to tackle the last question then at the end together, what we learn out of these processes, and how is it possible to translate different concepts to our specific conditions on the ground. I know these questions are huge and we could talk forever, but let's take it as a teaser for the conversation we have. We start with Vera. So I would like to address the first question now to Vera, to share with us a little bit from your very rich experience. You're one of the pioneer in this field. So it would be very interesting for us to hear your experiences, also your assumptions, as I said, before you went into practice, and what were specific challenges you witnessed while implementing your projects. Vera, please.
Thank you, Alia, and thank you, Qatar, and the Palestine Museum for hosting this amazing program on curation, because this is a question that has been in our mind and keeps coming back to us every time there is a new exhibition, and we question the purpose, the techniques, the practice, etc. I come from a premise of traditional exhibitions way back from the 70s with the Palestinian.
It's a bit not, the sound is not that clear.
Is this okay now?
Yes.
Okay. I come from a premise of the conventional way of curating exhibitions way back from the 70s with the League of Palestinian Artists, where the white cube was the issue, where you hung your paintings. There was no sense of curation at all. There was a drive of just showing what you have done to the people and the public, and putting things on the wall, whether it was beautifully curated, whether the relationship of the work together was no issue. The issue was just to have the exhibition going on. And I myself, I'm not a curator. I don't claim to be one, but I sort of fell into this post with my work at the Birzeit University Museum. And we had a lot of white cube exhibitions, and I was proud to say that maybe this was one of the few attempts at Birzeit University to produce exhibitions that are thought about in a more professional way, and to put the works out in a way that is appealing, that the information is correct, etc. In 2009, just without intention, we fell on a project to do the an exhibition on Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was the cultural capital of the Islamic world. And in 3 weeks, we were asked to do an exhibition on Jerusalem. And I remember we mounted our first cities exhibition, Jerusalem, My Home. You see the poster up behind me. That was a conventionally curated exhibition. It was the social history of Jerusalem with representations of the social life of the Jerusalem people, the crafts, the way they lived, the history, etc. But the appeal of this exhibition was so great. I mean, the audience and the attendance were amazing, that it triggered in me, and my colleague and partner in the cities exhibition, Yazid Anani, were once talking, and we said, we ought to do something more about our cities especially because of the isolation and the lack of mobility between the cities. We were estranged from our own geographies and landscape and history, etc. So we thought of starting the cities exhibition. And the first exhibition we did was the one you see on the bottom left of your screen, Ramallah, the fairest of them all. It was a very exciting discussion to start with. We thought of starting these exhibitions with more experimental approaches in the curatorial practices. The first exhibition in the Ramallah Fairest of them all included the white space of the museum, and also, the new thing about it was that we introduced artworks and art representations in the public spaces of Ramallah itself. So that was very challenging for us, because it took our efforts from organizing something within a limited space, 400 square meter space inside the museum, to the city, to the broader city, where we didn't know how the people would react to the different interventions and installations. There was a lot of controversies at times. I remember Yazid's intervention in that exhibition with Emily Jasser raised some concerns by the municipality of Ramallah. In Asia Scene's also intervention in the Cinema Al-Walid had problems. But we carried on, and the whole events outside the city were streamed live into the museum as they took place. So that was something, a big feat for us. It was a big project, and we felt that we could carry on from there. From that, we did several other exhibitions, cities exhibitions, the Nablus exhibition from Ebal to Jerusalem, the Jericho exhibition from the celestial to the terrestrial to the celestial, and the Gaza exhibition, reconstruction of Gaza, in addition to one on the Lud. Each one of those exhibitions took a different form of curatorial implementation. It was very exciting, and we do not pretend to have discovered ways of, because already we were starting to get exposed to the different contemporary curatorial practices. We were able, through using media and technology and widening the scope of the exhibitions to include talks and walks and discussions between the artists and the different things. So each exhibition had its own mode of representation within the city and within the exhibition itself, the museum itself, and it was very satisfying for us. But we had some thoughts about why do we want to have these exhibitions. Mainly was to affirm the uniqueness and the rich history of those Palestinian cities and the relationship with change in social, economic, and spatial processes and practices, to go beyond the stereotypical representation of nostalgia and folklore, while touching on the meaning of belonging, ownership, loss, and estrangement, and to use past knowledge of our cities as catalyst for self-reflection and change towards building contemporaneity in development, thought, and practice. These were the three premises on which we wanted to work. And maybe, I don't know, Alia, if we still have time to to do a little more talk about this? As curators, Alia? We don't hear you.
Wait, sorry. Perhaps I could just ask you a question directly here, if it's okay. It would be really interesting to hear how, if you could say so, after these different exhibitions in the different cities, how did this shifted or changed your practice? Like, are there specific assumptions or experiences also? Challenges you had to witness in the different cities, like, because especially you stressed that each one of these cities has its own specific conditions.
Yes.
Could you share this with us a bit?
The wide scope of the work itself was a different thing. We had to think in terms of management, a lot of management. In a wide cube space, you have a limited space, and whereby you select the works and you put them in a special way. Whereas when we were working on city exhibition, we multitasked, Yasin and I, we had to do all sorts of work. We were not only curators with building up a concept, we had to do the actual, not only the planning, we had to do the actual work itself. We had to write the catalog, the text for the captions. We had to design the catalogs. We had to carry ourselves the works back and forth, or in the sites proper, to work as technicians, to work as so it was. I don't think we worked as it was a different way of curating exhibitions. Our involvement, self-involvement, total involvement meant a lot to us. We felt we owned the projects, and it gave it a different dimension, and different. Now, in each case, the exhibition or outside in the cities was like a happening, whereby people, the audience, were from the cities themselves, and they toured around with us to look at the different locations and there was what we wanted to create was a discussion and a dialogue between us and the people in the cities, and the people within themselves, to question why these things are being put up. Like in the Ramallah exhibition, I remember Sandy Hilal and Alessandro Petti put up labels to Ramallah. Is Ramallah becoming like Dubai? What is the meaning of Ramallah, etc., etc. So there was a lot of discussion, and we aimed to have this kind of discussion. The problem is whether there was a sustenance to this kind of like if the Ramallah exhibition ended or the Nablus exhibition ended, what next? How do we follow up with this? So this was a question that we wanted to raise all the time and still are raising. I mean, yes.
Can I intervene, Alia, a little bit?
Please.
One thing that I think also was an issue that we pondered on for a long time is the fact what kind of art is introduced to public space, especially when you have different mentalities, different backgrounds of people that are, exposed to this art. And sometimes we had problems and issues. So we have international artists coming with concepts and ideas, and sometimes to juxtapose that with the local values created some issues and problems. And we had sometimes to question, are we censoring the artist or are we really looking for an art that communicate with the people? So art would really become a medium that the people trust, that it communicates something to them, rather than it's really opposing their value system and it's really contradicting it. So that was really a sort of a sensitive caliber that we carried on differently from one space to the other. So each city had its own sensitivities, and we had to deal with it. So this is some of the challenge in the implementation, I guess.
May I just interrupt, Keman? Sorry, it's very difficult to interrupt as a moderator from above. Sorry, Yazid, but do you think that this exhibition, the city's exhibition, experience in the implementation. I'm not so much talking now about the exhibition itself, but also the implementation of in the different setups you had changed something in your practice.
Yes, indeed. It's looking at the multiplicities of events and how we can think the event outside the white cube. This is very essential. We think also the format and the forms that are being used to be thought about in pertaining to different ideas. So walking was something that I still use walking as an essential component with artists. I mean, it's not really so much loved by artists to design a walk or to create a walk. For them, it's something outside of their comfort zone. But then it's something that relates you to the context as an artist, especially as an international artist would come. I mean, they find comfort in on white walls, in white cubes, but then when you take them outside, it becomes a problem of language, it becomes a different problem of understanding the context, it's communication, the gaze of foreigner gaze versus the local gaze, and these issues start to emerge, and I think these challenges are essential for me. It's really putting the artist outside their comfort zones all the time rather than having all these conventional forms and formats. So this is what I learned, and this is what I try to bring in my practice.
Also, I think, Yazid, in addition to that, it was very important for us to impress on the people we were dealing with in the different cities, like people in the municipalities, on that organizing such exhibitions with new dimensions, new ways of that. This is a way of we tried to impress on that, and we tried to do that through carrying on conversations with university students, like in Najah University and in Birzeit University. We had workshops, we had symposia around the exhibitions to try to expand that experience and to initiate more interest in this new form of art that's being presented. But I think what helped, especially in the Nablus one, is that the international artists and the local artists appropriated places in the old city itself, which had a lot of meaning for the people themselves in the city. So if they went to the soap factory and made an art intervention there, or went to the mill, the flour mill, people were happy to see their history and culture revived through a new way and medium, and it was a very interesting interaction with the people. So that also gave a new dimension to the curatorial approach.
I think, Alia, this is really a good point. It's that you don't really stop at intellectual conversations and artist conversation. It's really a small, closed community, and even with academics, it's still really too tiny. So as Vera said, is how this can be translated to the classroom in university, how this can be transformed into our partners from different institutions, how our thoughts can be also translated as points of departure to other projects in our partners, an educational system for kids in the neighborhood. So this is something that also affected the way we think about curatorial practices here in Palestine.
Also, I don't want to take too long, Alia, but also I often question myself whether we as local people working with in the local environment of museums and galleries and things like that, by introducing such forms to a public which is a little limited, are we becoming outsiders to the community around us? Are we outsiders with our thoughts and ideas? It's very important to see how we can progress or take off from there and involve the people in because there are so many issues and questions related to curation and exhibitions. We have very few museums lately, a couple, and then very few galleries. The experience of the public is very limited. So I feel it's a big responsibility to introduce new things without having the background of why we are introducing such things to the public.
Yeah, I would like to add one point here. before I would like to hand over to Tirdat actually. So one issue you just mentioned is that you learned or you took out of it that it's an ongoing process and you need to open up also your curatorial practice towards the field and towards the community because you gain something out of it. But I would like to stress here also another thing, as you just said, is that it's super important for us to document actually our experience and our knowledge we gain out of the practice on the ground. And this is what is missing because we know that there are a lot of interesting things going on. There were a lot of interesting projects already implemented, and we miss a little bit the possibility to share this knowledge with each other and to proceed in a way and to build on each other experiences as well. So I think that's a very important point, which we will not be able, of course, to solve right now, because that means to have time for research, to have time to reflection in a longer way, to really go into also the possibility to think more deeply about what it means, what shifted or changed, what kind of conflicts changed actually your concept, which you had before. Just one example from my point of view, or from my side, is when I entered the whole idea of urban intervention in Jerusalem and the Old City in 2013 with reviewing Jerusalem, which you know, Yazid, was that I thought that it's important, or that it's also possible to empower the community by these interventions to discuss the shrinking space from a different angle, from a different point of view. Similarly, what you have perhaps experienced in Ramallah during the city's exhibition. And at the end of the day, of course, although we were clearly clear about the totally different context in Jerusalem, nevertheless, we were extremely irritated by some of the challenges we had to witness with the community. Although there was a huge exchange and a huge preparation before, but the level of fear and mistrust we witnessed with the people we wanted to work with in Jerusalem was much higher than we ever expected. And that meant we had to change the whole concept of interfering or activating public space into simple points or issues like making people again feel comfortable and safe in a space at all, to start from a totally different level, to be able to discuss different usages of space in a general way with the community. And that was a huge lesson learned from my side, and I think Yazid shared that, which again goes then back to the whole idea of how do we work with public space intervention in Palestine. And I think that with your citizen exhibition also you witness different circumstances in the different cities. And it's an ongoing problem of our society being more and more fragmented. So the whole idea of insider, outsider, as we have in our title, is not anymore an issue of, as you also just said, Vera, inside, outside Palestine, but within Palestine itself, we become insider, outsiders. So let me now throw the ball to Tirdat, and so I hope we can also tackle a bit a critical point of view of your experiences when you came to Palestine and tried, and you implemented, of course, when you implemented the exhibitions. So please share with us your thoughts, Tirdat.
Sure. Thank you, Alia. Thank you, Vera and Yazid. It's great to be with you. And speaking after the three of you, it's a bit awkward because my curatorial experience in Palestine is a fraction of what you have done. I'm standing on the shoulder of giants here. So all the more I'm going to zoom in on what Alia mentioned earlier, to really use myself as a case study of curatorial assumptions and surprises. And this is during my 2-year stay in Ramallah, 2013 to 15, when I was part of the team of the Riwaq Biennale. And that I did some teaching in Palestine, but that was my one serious curatorial effort. And one assumption that was immediately challenged was just the sheer density of cultural / artistic production in a town the size of Ramallah was something that completely blew me away, and that is quite unique in comparison to any other city I've worked in, and that also played a role within the challenges that I was facing. I'll come to that in just a minute or two. The second was working with Riwaq. The Biennale is devoted, it's called the Riwaq Biennale, and so it's not named after a city, as in the Berlin Biennale, the Moscow Biennale. It's named after an institution, and it's designed to further the agenda of an institution unapologetically. This was also, something which was very unusual and I found refreshing. I assume most of our audience knows the agenda of Riwaq. I won't go into it. It's basically to work against the depopulation of small towns and villages across Palestine. And I assumed that a lot of artists would balk, that they would rebel, especially if they were invited from abroad. None of them did. And this too was a welcome surprise. Not only that, but when the then director of the institution, Khaldun Bshara, encouraged me to think along the lines of tourism, of how could a biennale work towards a form of sustainable tourism. This too worked, it clashed with my snobbish instincts as an arts curator, as in like, hold on a minute here, this is art we're talking about. But there too, the artists were a step ahead of me, and I remember a site visit to the village of Jabba with Jumana Manna, one of the commissioned artists, and she was very enthusiastically thinking about how to turn a sculpture garden into a sort of a contribution to the local touristic economy. These were all enormous challenges to me, but they were learning curves that I'm grateful for. I'll just mention one thing a little more specifically in the context of that biennale. So there were discursive events, there were commissions, and our big bang, big budget investment in a sort of large scale commission was with the UK artist Phil Collins, who agreed to do a version of his autokino project. We called it Cinema Sayara, on the rooftop of a historic building in downtown Ramallah. We installed a number of cars. It was quite spectacular, from which you could watch movies and listen to the soundtrack on the radio. And you were talking about the intricacies of working in public spaces, Yazid and Vera. And there we were trying to bridge the gap to the neighborhood by inviting the neighborhood to suggest films that were screened, and also anybody living nearby could just tune into a radio and listen to the soundtrack on an AM/FM frequency. And there's an added touch to this project. This building, on the rooftop of which we put all those cars and we did a kind of drive-in cinema setup, it was being renovated by Riwaq. And Riwaq did not want to be, they were hesitant because this building was destined to become another museum. And nobody really wanted another museum except for the municipality. And we hoped that through the Biennale we'd get our foot in the door, we'd get into a conversation with the mayor, and we'd be able to steer the conversation in another direction. That was the theory. In practice, we met with the mayor. He barely remembered who we were. He wasn't really interested in the conversation. The political leverage did not really happen. And the cinema stayed, I'll be brutally honest here. It was quite empty. It wasn't really used. And this turned into quite a source of irritation and embarrassment on our part. It made me think of two things, and I'll just close with those, and I'll gladly come back to this case study later in the conversation. Two things that I thought of was that to go back to the sheer density of cultural production in Ramallah, I think it's a setting where you have to take into account in a very serious way not only the general publics, but the professional field in a way that is, quite pressing. I think that it's quite a, speaking as an outsider, I think sometimes it's not only a dense space, but perhaps also a cramped space. You have to be socio-professionally very adept. And anyone who knows me knows that is not my strong suit. And to be fair to myself, I could say that one or two of my colleagues in the team, despite being locals, were not that much more, agile than I was. But this is one thing that really sort of gave me pause and made me think about what the importance is of building slowly towards a situation of camaraderie and solidarity. It wasn't so much with regards to the broader audience or the international audience, but with my colleagues on site. Last point is that I think I was a little too anxious about creating something contextualized and site-specific on all levels. What can you do, at the end of the day, what can you do with a biennial that you can't do with anything else? It's create a certain level of attention internationally. Like, I think that, maybe I shouldn't have been so embarrassed by those empty seats. I should have just used those pictures to create this really spectacular PR effort internationally and packaged it as a raging success. And I think that would have served the propagandistic potential of a biennial much more than this kind of sheepish self-reflection that we fell into. And that's a sort of general question that I wanted to throw out there before I hand over to Alia and Charles, is how, to which degree is a biennial something that is, beholden to specificities on the ground, and to which degree is a biennial is some, the kind of monster that is there to redistribute funds and to carry a message out, however propagandistically and bluntly. Is it more of a hammer than a laser instrument? These are questions that
Thank you, Judah.
Yeah.
These are huge questions now.
Sorry about that. I did my best.
I'm not sure we're able to go into this. I would like to pick a bit something else now. And I have to ask you, because even though you say it was only 2 years, but it was intense time for you. So how did it change your practice, or did it have any influence afterwards? And if you would be able to write it down, your experiences, where would you perhaps cross on a question of translation in a way of habits, in a way of assumptions as well, how you go into your conversation, how you think you are trying to be able to make up this conversation also with officials and with your community, and then at the end of the day, it turns out it doesn't work like this. So what are here also the bridges of translation? And if Yazid and Vera have something to say here as well, then go ahead. But perhaps no, sorry, I will not say that. Let's do that, because I still want to also grab the experience of Charles before we open up the whole conversation. So just this little question back to you, Tila.
Well, But I think you asked two questions. One was
Yeah.
what was the impact, and the other was the question of translation. When it comes to impact, very briefly, I still haven't become much more sociable, but I did take this question of the mission statement and trying to think more unapologetically, transparently about agendas, institutional agendas, political agendas. Because we know there is always one. You can just, at best you can mask it, deny it, make it milder, but it's always there. And instead, I've learned from this experience that you can speak to artists and other colleagues in very blunt ways, and they will be on board if it is the right agenda, and you don't really. You don't compromise the art as you're doing so. I mean, this is a very abstract statement, and I'd have to back it up with examples, and I can do that later. But that's definitely something that I learned. The question of translation, I'd answer it very simply. Usually, when we say translation, we assume, we think of cultural translation and linguistic translation. We think of misunderstandings along those lines. I think the biggest issue translation that I was up against was the one that I mentioned, namely how to build up a certain peer group with which you are in a conversation that really dovetails with the concerns you're struggling with at the moment. I think that every habitus, every town has its intricacies, and a town like Ramallah, even more than others, just takes time. It takes even 2 years. It's just too. We tend to think that 2 years is a long time within art, but actually it isn't. It should, in most cases, you require twice that to really get somewhere. Maybe that's all I would say for now.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I will free you here, and I will come back to you then later on, because I'm very much happy now to get in Charles into the conversation, and also to you, Charles, again. It would be great if you could share now one or two examples, and try to squeeze it also with this perspective of sharing with us your assumption before you entered and what you actually witnessed during the implementation.
Yes, thanks, Alia and Vera and Yazid. It's lovely to see you, and Teardad as well, albeit being online. And also, like Teardad, I feel that my experience is quite limited, and that I'm also standing on shoulders, the same shoulders actually, in terms of my experience in Palestine. I thought I'd just outline very quickly what it is, just by naming it, so that people would know, because it's also quite outdated, or at least it's quite a long time ago, and it also had particular conditions. So my experience in Palestine, at least in organizing and trying to do artistic activities, curatorial activities there, goes back to I would say more or less to 2005, maybe 2004. So really at the end of the first Intifada as well. So you have to imagine that this is when the apartheid wall is being built, where that shaped certainly my experience. So I know things are different now. No, the apartheid wall is still there, but nevertheless things are different. So we shaped by a particular moment in Palestinian history, or Palestinian social change, and it involves the Riwaq Biennale, so a predecessor of Teardad in that sense, in 2007 and 2009, and then working a lot on Picasso in Palestine. I'll come back to how they're organized, because I think that's one important consideration. So both of those projects essentially, and I think it was different when Teardad was doing it, but both of those projects were essentially artistic projects, or you could say meta-artistic projects initially. So both Khalil Rabah and Khaled Durrani, who were the artists who were involved, one with Riwaq, Khalil, and Khaled with Picasso in Palestine, both saw them as artistic acts in themselves. So I was coming in as a curator within an artistic project. In a sense, I was, in a certain sense, you could see I was paint on a canvas, in a certain sense, for somebody else's painting, and that itself was very interesting, I suppose, and that wasn't my initial assumption. That was something, the nature of the invitation revealed itself over time, which I think is also maybe where Teardad talks about time being necessary. It's also that the conditions are constantly shifting. So it's not something which is very firm. Now, if I talk about assumptions, I think to try and focus in on that rather than talk about the projects themselves, and we can mention some of the things in detail if necessary. But I think that when I first arrived, I just finished other biennales, Gwangju and Istanbul. So I had a certain idea of what a biennale was to some degree, and also a biennale outside of my own country. And I'm coming from Northwestern Europe with all the sort of limitations of that educational system, that vision, the ignorance, the blind spots, which being a Northern European are, and also the lack of consciousness in many senses of those blind spots, because Northern Europe presumes that it's the whole world. So I mean that position is one that's needs a lot of re-education in order to overcome, because you have the first 20 years of my life were completely swallowed up with that conviction that Northern Europe was the world and the rest was somehow behind on some modernist train. No? So I had to unlearn so much. And part of that unlearning, if you talk about impact, was certainly my experiences in Palestine. They were crucial to it. But when I came in, even having had experiences in Gwangju and Istanbul, which already had opened up the possibility that life was elsewhere, if you like, the ideas that I initially had were to think about space and to think about how that space might be shaped by artistic projects, by works that already exist or new commissions that might be done, and also about funding, because they're the kind of fundamentals that you think about. And I think in this case, very rapidly, neither of those were particularly available. What I realized in arriving in Palestine, in being taken round by Riwaq people, also by Yazid, indeed, in those early days when we were all a lot younger, that process made me understand. I mean, in very simple terms, I didn't understand until then that the idea of going from Ramallah to Beit Sahor to see Sani Alessandro or to Bethlehem or wherever was actually not something which was taken for granted. That was something which had a whole set of resistances, I think, within the community itself, because of many things, the horror of the checkpoints and of the control systems, the danger of the road itself. It's not, at least it wasn't in those days, a very safe road between Bethlehem and Ramallah. There were many resistances to those things. The same happened with going to Sabatia or something, to some of the villages that Riwaq were opening. This idea simply of travel was already a kind of something that needed to be organized and structured, and people needed to be encouraged in order to think about it as a possibility. Now, that's a particular situation in Palestine that you wouldn't really encounter in other places, where things are relatively close together and mobility is taken for granted, or rather assumed. I think what was interesting is that when I went back then to that Northern European isolated zone in the world, you sort of understood how ignorant the people that I was talking about, even the artists that I were, about the conditions in Palestine at that time. Because remember, particularly in Northwest Europe, partly because of Northwest Europe's genocidal activities in the Second World War, there's a mental block on wanting to know what is happening in Palestine, because it confronts them with that history which they don't want to be confronted with, partly. But also there's a mental block because they don't want to understand that Israel, Palestine as two states sitting alongside each other does not really exist, and the imbalances of power are something that they do not want to talk about. No? So they're constantly trying to negotiate, relativize that situation, and they would rather not know. So there's within the art world, we saw that in Documenta not so long ago, there's a refusal to deal with that. Certainly that's what I found. So as I went through from that initial assumptions about funding and space and thinking who might be interesting, it became more and more clear to me that actually the most important thing that we could do, at least with Riwaq, was bring people over to experience it on the ground. What I found is that my explanations of what was happening fell on stony ground, that people did not want to hear that, and so they didn't hear it. So the only way was actually, it felt like, to organize a structure where people could come and visit those places, could do that traveling, which exactly many people in Palestine don't want to do, but to experience it makes clear what the situation is, what the nature of occupation is, what the nature of the apartheid wall is, what the nature of Israeli oppression is. And that, I think, is something that needs to be bodily experienced in order for anybody to come away with an assumption that there is an issue around here. So I think that then became the sort of focus within this canvas, as I say, that Khalil, for instance, was trying to paint, within the demands that Riwak had, and this was very well described by Teardad, of being an organization which had particular demands around the villages, the repopulation of the villages, the use of the buildings which had fallen into decay. And I think there was always a question for me. You know, we would go to the villages and they were largely empty, to be honest. I mean, partly people were in the fields working. There were times when it was busier, certainly. But also those villages at least were in 2009, 2008, were relatively empty. So the issue was very clear, but also these buildings were being restored. But then the question of the function of those buildings for Riwak was, I think, at least for me at that time, really an open question. Like, what is it to restore a building which no longer has the function that its restoration would imply? And how do you develop new kinds of functions for it? So I think that by the second one, which I worked together with Reem Fada as well on, and the first one was also done in collaboration. It was maybe two things to say. By the second one, we had really thought, and this comes back to Yazid's point, I think, that it was much more relevant to try and use the Biennale as a structure, not necessarily to invite artists to make work, but to allow people within those villages and also within Ramallah to show what they themselves are doing to that international art community. In other words, that the dialogue was the other way around from the traditional one. So the change between assumption and implementation was inviting people into space with a certain amount of money to saying, this is what Palestine is, and you need to look at this if you're going to understand the contemporary world in any way, if the art world's going to be able to open its eyes at all. Now, I don't think, given what happened in Documenta, it's arguable whether we had any success in that. But I did notice artists like Artur Jamiewski showed the key, for instance. He was one of the people in Riwak who showed the key later on in his Biennale in Berlin, the huge key, which implied the right of return and things like that. So these elements were, I feel, were picked up by artists in different ways. Otolith Group picked it up, different artists. Tanya Bruguera also was involved in these things. So, artists who have gone on to be quite established or have gone on to acquire possibilities that have remained in dialogue, at least in their own minds, perhaps not so much perhaps present in Palestine, but in their own minds have remained in dialogue with these discussions. And that seems to have been an important aspect of what Riwak, I think, certainly achieved. I can talk maybe about Picasso in Palestine, but the other thing I'd like to say is that what we did, and I think this is maybe familiar to everyone here, is because the funding and the space were issues, we started to think about how to piggyback on other organizations and other structures which were existing, which could then help Riwak in this case to become more visible. So that was whether there was an Israeli-Palestine collaboration with Galit Alat and Reem Fada called the Liminal Spaces, or there were projects, there were conferences that were already organized around architecture with Riwak and with other people in the theater in Ramallah, for instance. That these things we started to incorporate into the events and the activities. Also working with Jack Pesekian and Al Mamel, and then later also with Picasso in Palestine. This was before the Jerusalem show. So the nature of it became, I think, a very sort of dynamic a dynamic letting go of expectations of what a Biennale was, and an attempt to try and invent something new within the context that I found myself, which was the context of the artists and the artwork that we were part of, and a context of what was possible in Palestine, and also what needed to be said in Palestine. And then eventually, I think, if we'd gone on, I think we would have been able to try, and I think Teardad tried to do this, to bring more works like Phil Collins and things like that into the mix. But when we started at that point, it really felt necessary to bring people into encounters in which that experience would speak beyond the Biennale itself.
Thank you very much, Charles. I just wanted to see how we can come back a little bit to a different angle I would like to raise here, because I know we are talking now about the Biennales, and of course this is where you have your both experiences, but I think, Yazid, if I'm not mistaken, the whole issue of Biennale and the concept and the policy behind it it's another topic as well. Can you say something here, Yazid?
Yeah, I think we have a different session on biennials later on.
That's why I don't want to ask us too much to go into this, because it's a real huge issue questioning the whole concept of the biennales in general, and especially when it comes to Palestine and our experience with all these different biennales per se. And especially as well, the question of why we always have foreign curators coming in for the biennales. I mean, this whole topic, I think, will be needs to be discussed and needs to be critically discussed and will be discussed on another panel. So where I would like to come back to is that when we have this kind of internal, external experiences in our situation, nevertheless, my impression is that we are losing the possibility to learn something out of it and to gather this information and to develop it in something else. So this is one point I really would like to stress again, because this would need much more time and much more time for research, etc., to giving time also for curators to be able to reflect about their work. This is one thing I would like to stress again. And then I would like to raise now the question for our group to come back to. I would like to find a way how to squeeze you into this. I would like to hear from you how the experiences you had changed really your practice for in the next round, because you talked in general about that. For example, with you, Charles, it gave you a different kind of perspective. It opened up your northwestern closed circle in a way and perspective towards the world, the arrogant behavior of the canon of the thinking of having the answers for everything and then finding out, of course, it doesn't work like that, so etc., this whole decolonizing perspective. But nevertheless, the question stays on how do we then translate it into a next step for our practice. So I would like to hear once more if you have here specific points, and I will point back now to Yazid.
I've been mentioning a couple of points, Alia, how these affected my practice, and I think, but it's really different, especially when you move from one institution to the other, and then you have to deal with the institutional political mind. This is one thing. The openness to, Riwaq was something that an institution that all of us worked with, especially on the biennial with. And it was really easy, the mindset to discuss ideas and transform them into practices, let's say. But then there are so many hindrances, especially here. The perception of art and this is one thing, and contemporary art practices are not so much. Doesn't have an appeal to so many of the audiences, and the people are much more clutched on committed art practices, the paintings of the committed artists back in the 70s and 80s, and this is what they have as something familiar, something that means a lot in terms of symbolism and iconography, and proposing art in a different forms, and different setting. Art as a space of conversation is sometimes is really difficult to propose. So why, and you get so many questions from the audience, and rightly so. They ask, but why is this art? And why are we doing this? We can do this in an academic setting. So why are artists doing conferences? Why are artists really doing walks? And why is there a sound installation? This is not art. You cannot see anything. Why sound is an art? So, we are confronted also here with these difficulties of, so the institution working in the art, they are also trying to convey a different definition of how art is really developing in the world. So bringing these instruments and tools back to Palestinians are not always easy. This is one thing. So, I mean, it depends on the project, it depends on the context. So how much you can push these lessons that you've learned from other experiences into certain certain projects and practices. This is something that's always under discussion. So it depends.
Yeah, it depends also. Yeah, Vera, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to say something, I forgot. No, we should always remember that the curation of exhibitions and the introduction of new forms of interaction, of visual and auditory and contemporary approaches to curation is still foreign in Palestine. And we're only talking about places like Ramallah, Jerusalem and maybe Bethlehem. But when you think of the general situation in Palestine, there's nothing existing as far as issues dealing with curation and big exhibitions that have technical aspects like media and audiovisuals, and so I think we're talking a little bit in a vacuum or the bubble of Ramallah, and I wish we would also start thinking again of the other audiences who are deprived of even that, of even the contemporary of exhibitions that are taking place at the Qattan Foundation, at the Palestinian Museum, at Birzeit, maybe sometimes. So I think we should also come to reality to realize that we have set up an artificial platform of curation that has not developed except for within our own circles, our own little environments. I don't want to be too critical because what I see happening at Qattan is amazing. I mean, and the Palestinian Museum, the kind of exhibitions that take place are very enlightening to the people who come and see them, but they're often alienating to the people. So we have to think in terms of whether we should introduce the contemporary alongside with the more conventional and keep at it until we reach a plateau whereby we can afford to present to our public a very novel way of thinking. This is
just a couple of words extra. I mean, in relationship, Alia, I think also the critique to Ruwaq Biennial at a certain time was from that kind of point of departure, that it seems really foreign. And also Qalandia International, so there's always the relationship between these big festivals and the locality and how they have a gaze on these artists coming from abroad and these local curators and artists, and it's a clique, you know, that has, but it's sort of there's an estrangement to that relationship sometimes, and it needs to be considered, as Vera said.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I mean, I think that's a very, very important point that we have to raise, because it question, of course, the whole concept of curating, and as it's known in the canon or whatever, in the dominated discussion, and there's a big question mark why we need it at all, for whom and to whom we speak. I mean, to whom we are doing it, for whom we are doing it, why we're doing it. If the whole point is, as Charles, for example, also explained a little bit, to bring in people to show how the reality on the ground, so it's a bit of a political touristic setup, then perhaps we just admit that this is the point of it. Perhaps it would make it easier also to explain why we're doing it, because it has a certain level or certain value for us in the communication with the world. So the communication with the world about our situation is through art and culture, one door which is still open, and we cannot close it because there are not a lot of other doors open anymore. So then it would make sense, and if we admit it and say, yeah, that's how it is, without saying we fall into the trap of politicizing art or making just political art. No, just admitting the direction and the context we're working in, and especially also using perhaps a tool which is foreign to the majority for a certain perspective or a certain aim, and that can be then much more honest, even perhaps in the communication with the community. Because, yeah, that would be my point in this to share with you. Would be perhaps a bit radical now to say curating for what. I don't want not to end our conversation in this way. So I don't know if we have still time to talk also with audience or with questions. You have to help me out here a little bit because I see that time is now running out, and I don't want to silence people who are listening to us because I don't have actually the overview here.
Okay, I think there's a question from the audience here.
Charles,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
No, I think it's better to have a question from the public. I just wanted to say, okay, sorry. I think because I'm sitting here in Eindhoven in provincial Netherlands, no? And these questions of an alienation of the public are not exclusive to Palestine. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to understand that the general idea of particularly contemporary art, but even of art and culture in general, is understood by many people to be an anathema. Goebbels famously said, "When I hear the word culture, I reach for my gun." And there hasn't been much changing from many people's attitude towards it since that 1930s moment. Yeah? So we've had that idea of alienation, often used in the case of Goebbels, for populist reasons. Because probably really Goebbels was quite interested in it, but for political reasons he would make that statement. Now that process is one I think that I'm very familiar with from Northwest Europe and from our own condition, and something that is not only a struggle, but it's a necessary struggle. No, it's a necessary struggle to not go down an entirely populist route. At the same time, I think your idea that there is a way in which Palestinian culture can present itself to visitors rather than visitors presenting themselves to Palestinians.
No, that's sorry, Charles. That's what not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we are using contemporary art to open up a door. So it's a bit different of presenting Palestinian culture. That's not what I said. I said really going straight forward, being very blank, and saying, yeah, we're using contemporary art, and we are with this biennale, how we are describing it, and using them to be in conversation with the world and to stay in conversation with the world, because a lot of other doors and channels are closed to us. So that's what I meant with.
And I think that's a really interesting discussion. I think we could get into, but you could extend that by also thinking that door that you're opening to Palestine is also to Palestinian culture, not only to its politics, but to all the diversity of activities that are going on. And I think that comes back to the idea of RIWAC in terms of sustainable tourism and things like that, and how much can those discussions in a situation like Palestine actually merge. Feels to me that that's quite a rich territory to explore.
Shall we, Tidad, or audience? Alia?
Yeah, I don't know if Tidad wanted to say something. Otherwise, I would open.
No, I would have added what Charles said at the very end. So it would be great to hear from the audience.
Okay. We have a question from Samar Marta.
Actually, I don't want to ask a question. I just want to add to what Alia was saying and what Charles was saying as well. We say when we curate, who are we curating for? But I think it's the nature of the projects we create. Like, for instance, from Art School Palestine and our experience in Art School Palestine, it was always bringing artists into Palestine and engaging with the community they stayed in, and they curated their own exhibition within the community they worked with. So that's the way you create a dialogue with the community. And as Charles said, at the end of the day, it's not just Palestine, because what Vera said, it's like we're living in a bubble in Ramallah. I don't think so. There are so many initiatives and so many collectives happening outside of Ramallah city. Like, if you go to Hebron, there are so many collectives that are doing a lot of projects. The same thing in Nablus. Of course, they don't have the facility the museum or the Qattan have, but there are so many initiatives taking places, which I think worth encouraging and worth working with. And I just want to comment on the role of culture and arts. Like, we talk about RIWAC Biennale like being like a place, like a touristic biennale or political, a political touristic place, but I think all countries have used this as well. Like if we talk about Liverpool, for instance, Liverpool Biennale, it started as a place to regenerate the whole Liverpool. So it's not just Palestine where we are using arts and culture. So, and I think it's legitimate. Why should we be ashamed of, or should be shy or shy off from using arts and culture as a way to promote our cause or promote the Palestinian, I don't know what you want to call it, Palestinian arts and culture, and also the political situation. And that's what we did as Art School Palestine. We used artists as our diplomats in a way, internationally. That's what I wanted to say. I just wanted to comment on that.
Yes, thank you. Do we have more comments or more questions from the dance? Like the audience, I can.
I just wanted to very briefly respond to what someone was saying, is that I'm grateful for what she said, so I can just clarify. I hope I didn't give the impression that, Khaldun Shara's suggestion that I engage with tourism is something to be shy or embarrassed about. On the contrary, the events such as Liverpool Biennale, or is it a Triennale? They translate into a kind of city development which is not regulated along any clear lines, and so it turns into the usual kind of gentrification that in many other places. If it's not thought about very rigorously, it just dovetails with whatever is happening regardless. And so when an institution such as BWOC stakes a claim that goes against the economic grain, I think this is when you can really embrace the institutional agenda and even try to take it a step further. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yes, thank you. Do we have another
Anna, I have something to highlight. Anna, we cannot also put so much emphasis and weight on one project and decontextualize it from other practices, as Sama said. It's very important that the compilation or the sum of these practices to understand what is going on, rather than focusing in one, saying what's wrong and what's right in these practices, and what we've learned and what we assumed and what has been implemented. I think it's very important. I mean, this is why we're doing this. We're trying to really understand how these the accumulation of all of this, what does it mean to us as Palestinians, and what are how can we look at curatorial practices as, especially, I mean, Charles was saying that I've been trying to make some communalities with the idea of culture in Netherlands, but I think what's different here is that culture is the only space left for us to, whereby we have the freedom of choice, we have the freedom of expressing ourselves, the freedom of thinking and discussing outside the political and economic realm. And I think it's different. And I think this is the only space where we can really now act. I mean, now it's under the control of the authorities and the Israelis, and slowly they're really understanding that these spaces are really creating something that needs to be stopped. And we've been witnessing such attacks on the cultural scene lately. So it's very important also to think about culture in Palestine as the uniqueness of that space for us, as an only space of thinking and bringing discourse in society. But then the problem again is community populism and elitism, let's say, in the clique of culture.
I would like just also to mention here, the point is that what I wanted to make as a point is that it's so important to go deeper in our practice, not just to see what is wrong and right for per se, to smash anything or to dismiss anything, but to learn from it and to have it shareable, because this is a very, very important tool. And because the experiences are so rich, and because what we're trying to do is one of the last spaces where we can act inside and towards outside the world, it is important to share these experiences and to look also deeper and to look really into our doing and our implementation, our making. So, which sounds perhaps a bit too much of a sociological point of view, but it really can give us, I believe, very, very deeply, and as it can give us a lot of knowledge we lose if we don't grab it and try to document it and try to keep it, to have it for ourselves and for our friends and colleagues to share. Yes, I have again the question if there's anything else in the air which I don't see. No, I don't see any questions from. Is there anything else from the audience? I don't see it.
No, we don't have, even on Zoom.
Okay, in that way, I would thank you for your participation, and I hope this was a bit of a glimpse. It was not more than this. I'm very much aware of it. We could have discussed much more and much deeper. And but perhaps it can make a start, as Yazid said, for something else to grow out of it. And the need, I think we all agree here that the need is there to dig deeper and to grab all the knowledge we have from the different perspectives, and to come into conversation if we're inside or outside, and to discover who is the insider and who's the outsider. We never really answered that question, I have to realize right now. And I think this will stay also with us. We don't know who's the insider and who's the outsider. So thank you very much, Yazid and Vera. I wish I could be there now.
Come back.
Allah, I'm busy.
Yeah, all of us.
All of you, come back.
I'm coming.
Alia, we have a question from the
Oh yes,
audience.
please. After my speech, good. Go ahead.
I'm not sure it's really a question. Thank you all. Maybe it's a comment. It's a very interesting discussion. Thank you for your contributions. I'm not sure really while you were talking. I was thinking if I want to zoom out and about like an art piece in Ramallah. That by itself is an art piece, really. What's happening in Ramallah, in Palestine in general, it's not really normal. So the process of also, or to have artistic practices here, is something that is very, very delicate, sensitive. It's really nothing. It's like nothing around the world. So I think some of also the contributions has acknowledged that, but I'm sure it also has its own implications on the practices themselves. I also don't think it's fair to only evaluate any effort only by how much people were there, but I really think it's interesting that what Ms. Vera Tamari was talking about is that when they had the exhibition around Ramallah and Ramallah social change, I think it's interesting that it attracted a lot of people, because it's a really big question that even the people of Ramallah don't want to face, but it's a good indicator for a very good question. My question is, when you're having something that is huge, international in Palestine, does Palestine affect it, or does it affect Palestine, the collective, the community, the people? Is it only like a lab where we're looking at interactions, or are we also looking at a very long legacy, if you want, concept definitions, a really, let's say, parallel word, kind of. So out of this experience and your experiences, stories, I'd like to hear what you have to say about this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you say your name?
Rita Abu Ghosh.
Rita. Thank you, Rita. Please, who wants to answer first? Vera, you want to go into it? Or
I think it's more to Charles and Teardad, no? That's what I understood.
No,
All of us, okay.
All of us, yeah. So who
Wow,
wants
this is
to
a
answer?
difficult
Who wants to
question.
go into this first?
I mean, as I understood it, it's to what extent is Palestine a state of exception in a way? Not that was the question.
Yeah, Art, does the biennial affect Palestine or Palestine affect the biennial, as I
Yeah, that's what I understood as well.
translated? Yeah,
Right.
how is that kind of interaction, and what does happen when these two words collide? That's what I think.
I mean, I think the interesting thing that I could observe, say from Riwak, is that I remember that Artur at a certain point, you know, being brought up in Poland, being brought up with the Holocaust and things like that, said, "Have you brought me to a re-education camp?" And that sort of idea that there was a information that was simply unavailable, and I think you can't underestimate the extent to which the information that you get and the understanding that you get from being in Palestine is not available to people who have not done that. So that process is one that's very effectively shielded from people in places where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of does the Biennale affect or does Palestine affect the Biennale? Palestine affects the artists. So the effect is through the bodies of the artists who actually have to move through that space, at least in my experience. So that's one of I think the profound effects that the projects that have been done in Palestine over the years with international artists have had. There's also undoubtedly an opportunity for artists in Palestine through the mechanisms of the Biennales, and that's not only the Biennales in Palestine, but those out with Palestine. I met Khalil Rabah because he participated we invited him for the Istanbul Biennial in 2005. That's how I met him. So those structures, I know we're talking about biennales and you don't want to, but just imagine that they're exhibitions. So that invitation to somebody who's living in Ramallah to an exhibition outside then also allows them to speak from their own position to an international public. So certainly that's a mechanism which affects things where Palestine affects the biennales. Whether the biennales affect Palestine, I think, is something that actually Yazid and Vera would have to speak to, because I think that's not something that I feel I could comment on.
Thank you, Charles.
For my part, I was trying in my contribution to explain the different ways in which, you know, the experience of working in Palestine curatorially was a very steep learning curve, and exactly the opposite of, you know, looking at what was the turn of phrase, looking at Palestine like some object in a laboratory. You know, how to work with an institutional agenda, and so forth. And I could add something which maybe goes specifically into what Alia was asking earlier in terms of what impacted your practice while you were working in Palestine. Another example I could mention, which is, you know, taken to really interesting extremes in Palestine. You could use the word perhaps, you know, trailblazing or avant-garde, is how to think through structures, how to think through funding and administration, and even paperwork in a way that is part and parcel of the creative process. And I'm thinking of Sandy Hilal and Alessandro Petti's work for the Riwak Biennale, where they were trying to propose the Deishe refugee camp as a site for UNESCO. And I could also point to Yazan Khalili and his team at the Khalil Sakakini Center. When they were working there, they were trying very hard to think through financial and administrative parameters as something which is part and parcel of the creative process. And things like these I had not seen in other places. Interestingly, at the Documenta, Ruan Grupa was then doing precisely that, and it offered another link to Palestine, which was not only thematic, but, you know, in terms of their method. And so, you know, I could go on. There's so many things that presented themselves as challenges and learning curves that, yeah, I think that would be my answer to the question.
And I can tell about how the learning process also happens here. And I think there are three main levels. The gaze of the artists and the internationals coming to Palestine is something that is always contradictory for me. I mean, it's not really in a bad way, but then it culturally sort of analyzes with its tools and which is its background knowledge and cultural histories and epistemologies is, I think that kind of conflictual relationship brings back also the question of oneself, identity, the relationship to the place, the relationship to the nation, the idea of liberation. All these questions are really placed into the grinder of pondering and thinking. And I think this is, the gaze is one thing that always astounded me, the way other artists looked at us. I mean, that kind of contradiction is very essential in self-critique and really autocritique and understanding oneself and your position in your job, your family, your community, your nationality, etc., the word, region. The second level, I would say, is the breaking so many notions. For me, I mean, all these concept of contemporary art practices are foreign to me. I mean, as Yazid, I was introduced to them slowly, and for me, it's always creating a critique to the practice itself, to what we inherit from these big biennials, what we see from there, and what does it mean, an exhibition, a white cube, why art is been done this way, why are we doing this? I mean, these questions always, does it really fit us? Can't we really think about other tools of practice, methods of doing things, and do we need to stick with the Western canon and its definition of what is art, what is curatorial practice? Is always something that has been a curiosity to me, and up till now I'm thinking about these things. And the third is the smaller cultural conflicts that happens in everyday working with artists and international. I'm not also saying that this is really bad, but then it's just that the way we emphasize on things and what is important, what is not important to us, and where do we find problems and where do they find problems. And it's this comparative analysis, I would say, this kind of juxtaposition really makes you think about also your everyday practice and question the smaller stuff happening in the everyday.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are lots of questions that we have to raise when we're looking at the overall experience of curation in Palestine. And I think we should look at little examples whereby the interaction directly with the community was successful, like an exhibition that took place in Asira, led by an artist from Asira itself. She held an exhibition, her exhibition, in an old house in Asira, renovated by Rewaq. And the participation of the people in that exhibition, of the villagers in the exhibition, and their enthusiasm and reaction to what they saw, although the paintings and the works on the wall were not very as they would have liked to. Probably they were more modern, more experimental. But the whole participation of the village in that particular happening was amazing. And I think we should look into how we can penetrate into areas that of curating in different ways. And I think the accumulation of our knowledge slowly will put us in a place whereby we can be more effective in using our curation to spread knowledge to the people around us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That sounds, that's exactly what I was hoping for, that we come up with this kind of reflections now. This is really beautiful that this came out, also triggered by you, Rita. Thank you. And I just would like to add one experience as well, because I think, as Yazid said, it is always this confrontation with the ideas you have when artists come from outside, foreign artists come and meet Palestinian artists, and you try to implement an art project intervention together in a specific place, that it always comes back to your own conceptions and your own assumptions, your own concepts, questioning your point of view. And at the end of the day, the interesting part is that we are embedded, of course, in a certain way of thinking, and these meeting points, let me put it that way, of internal, external, can trigger conflicts, which helps us to develop ourselves. And if creating, I think like what you also now just described, Vera, is very much going into the direction to create with the community and not for. And this is, I think, one of a very typical results we all already come through when we're working here on the ground. So thank you again. I think at this point now I would close our conversation, which was a conversation, which is nice, although we are separate through this digital thing in between us. As I said, it would be nicer to sit with you on the couch there in Ramallah, but thank you. And I hope it was interesting for all of you, and we can keep up this conversation and let it not drop and see what can develop out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night. Bye-bye.